This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames, and this is A Little Bit Culty.
We woke up from a cult, and that journey was captured in The Vow on HBO and in my memoir, Scarred.
Now, in this podcast, we break down the shame and secrets that make these experiences so destructive with honest conversations on how seemingly benign groups can cross into the cultiverse and how to spot and recover from trouble if it happens to you.
Each week, we bring in experts, survivors, and whistleblowers to explore red flags, resilience, and even share a few laughs because sometimes you gotta laugh.
Subscribe to our Patreon for early and ad-free listening, some live Q&A, and exclusive content at patreon.com/alittleBitCulty.
Welcome to Season 8 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty, everybody. Sarah wants this announcement, and I agree. She's the appropriate person to do it. What do you got, Sarah?
Well, last night, it was hand-delivered to us, the first sample of our book, printed here in Atlanta.
And I opened it with my blade, per usual.
And it's beautiful. I have to say, I laughed, I cried, I felt a lot of emotion. This has been a labor of love. This book is out. It is available on Amazon. The Audible is coming soon. The ebook is up. Thank you.
I hugged it. May have kissed it.
Those
may
of
have
you
rubbed my face in it.
who pre-ordered, thank you. You will be getting our signed copy soon. For those of you who don't care about the signature, I get it. It's on Amazon. Please buy it and give it to everyone you know, and especially people who are involved in something a little bit culty. They need this, or somebody who got out of something, or somebody who's a seeker and they might be susceptible. This is a book for everybody. Changing gears.
Segue Sarah.
What if someone told you they had the tools to reprogram your brain for success, confidence, and unlimited influence? What if those same techniques were also being used to sell millions of dollars in self-help, close high-stakes deals, and, according to some critics, manipulate people into giving up their money, their autonomy, or worse?
What if questioning is one of the ways they reframe, Sarah? In this episode, we are welcoming back investigative journalist Alice Hines, an Emmy-winning correspondent whose reporting has appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and New York Magazine. She previously joined us to talk about her Prime Video docuseries, Desperately Seeking Soulmate, Escaping Twin Flames Universe. You all may remember that episode, which helped expose one of the internet's most notorious modern cults.
Jeff and Shalala.
Now
Alice is back with a new podcast from Kaleidoscope and iHeart Podcasts called Mind Games, which dives into the strange and controversial world of neuro-linguistic programming, also known as NLP. Born in 1970s California, NLP promised a kind of psychological superpower, the ability to hack your own mind or someone else's. Obviously, we had both heard of NLP before since it is so prevalent in NXIVM, and we're going to get into all of that in the episode in the most delicious way for all you NXIVM nerds out there.
In our conversation, we get into the wild history behind NLP, the larger-than-life characters who help spread it around the world, and the uncomfortable question at the center of Alice's investigation. Is mind control real, or are we all just more suggestible than we'd like to believe?
We learned a lot, and we were also triggered a lot, and we'll tell you all about it. Here's our episode with
Alice Hines.
Alice Hines, welcome back too.
Yeah.
A Little Bit Culty. Cool. Yeah.
So good to have you back. Although it feels like you've been here because we've been listening to your series since it dropped and feel like, you've been in our ear and in our kitchen.
Well done, by the way.
Yeah, well done. So when you first made that connection between Twin Flames and NLP and NXIVM, what was it like to connect all those dots as a reporter?
It was something that I had intuited for a long time because you watch these docuseries and you read these articles and people seem to talk about very similar experiences. And I've also interviewed a lot of cult survivors who like describe having like wake up moments when learning about other groups, which I think is really interesting. So I feel like there's patterns that there's the bite model. There's things that they have in common. And so I felt like when I was learning about NLP, I was like, this makes a lot of sense because these are psychological techniques that could be helpful for people, but also can kind of lead to the, I guess, like detachment from reality that is common to a lot of these groups.
Well, I have a feeling that we're going to be saying this a lot in the next few months, but I don't know if you saw, Alice, but our next book came out, which you helped fact check, the small NLP section. Thank you for that.
Yeah, congrats on the book.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure you get a copy because we talk about you and your work a couple of times in the book. But I was going to say, I wish I'd heard this series before the book was out because I feel differently about NLP now since hearing your series. Yeah.
What did you think it was before? And then what do you think it is now?
I'm going to get to that. That's a great question, Nippy. But I'm first going to ask Alice to explain to our audience what NLP is in case they're new to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming. It is a set alternative psychology technique that is designed to change beliefs and behavior. It is broadly under the umbrella of hypnosis, but there's also some linguistics and some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, sort of mixed in. The people who created it took references from a lot of other people and blended them together into this self-help smoothie that they sold to the US military, Fortune 500 companies, a lot of psychotherapists, as well as people like Tony Robbins was an NLP practitioner. Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, used it for sales. Later on, Nancy Salzman, who you know and who your listeners know, also got trained in it. And also the pickup artist movement, if you're familiar with these sort of speed seduction guys. Yeah, the game, exactly. These guys who are like, oh, we're going to use these sort of verbal tricks to get women to sleep with us. They got some of their techniques from NLP. So that is it in a bit of a nutshell.
Great. So to answer your question, Nip, what did I think before and what did I think after? I think what's really kind of crazy and like, talk about connecting the dots is that when we were in NXIVM, and I think I may have shared this with you when you had me on Mind Games, Nancy's street cred was that she trained with Bandler and Grinder.
Bandler and Grinder.
Bandler and Swindler. Sorry, Bandler and Grinder.
You're not the first to make that joke.
Oh, I'm sure. And
I'm not that original.
It's just kind of crazy because it just shows another layer of like my personal, I'm not speaking for you, Nippy, my personal lack of education on the topic, but also research and
your trust.
And trust.
It was leveraged trust.
Like there is a method out there. She was trained in it, according to the lore of the people who created it. She trained under them. She got as much. It was
her appeal to authority.
Yes. She trained as much as she could. She got the most that she could. And then she still wanted to learn more until she met Keith. And then she realized she was learning from the best. And then there's another level of everything she learned from Keith. But just my reference to like, just similarly how we reference Mark Vicente, who did What the Bleep. That was our appeal to authority. Nancy was appealing to Bandler and Grinder, and she trained under them, and Ericksonian hypnosis. So we would, we would say, she's trained with these top-level people. I didn't know that they were very similar sort of sketchy characters as we discover in your series.
It was baked into her narrative, too.
Yeah.
While she was building rapport with you.
Yeah, right? It is super interesting.
So
that's the con of Nancy that you just described. So her con incorporated
referencing
their stories, which were particularly hard to reference. I mean, you had a hard time just from hearing. If we wanted to go check on Bandler and Grinder, it would have taken us, what you did.
How long did it take you to do the series?
Yes, that's a really good point. People who are, hearing about NLP like you all did and who are kind of thinking, oh, this is legitimate. Nancy worked for Con Edison. There's a lot of companies who are using this. So it seems like a real thing from the professional world, which, by the way, is true. But there's also this whole other shadier side of the NLP's history, which is the fact that it was created, on a college campus. Richard Bandler was an undergraduate student doing sort of psychological experiments on his peers. John Grinder was a linguistics professor, so he did have a PhD. And there were people in the psychiatry space who were sort of mentors of this pair and who signed off on NLP early on. One of them being renowned family therapist Virginia Satir. Milton Erickson, who you mentioned before, is a psychiatrist and a hypnotherapist who did a lot to put hypnosis on the mainstream map and still has a lot of credibility today. These are people who really were like, yeah, NLP is so cool. This could really help a lot of people. Early on, when it was created, some of those mentors helped Bandler and Grinder get access to a psychiatric ward where there were people with very serious mental health diagnoses that had been institutionalized. And these undergraduate students and a professor were experimenting with these techniques on these patients, which is just stunning that something like that would be allowed. And I think it speaks to this moment where NLP emerged from, which was this sort of like very kind of like post-hippie California new age, like Esalen vibe.
I was going to say, it had a hippie vibe.
Yeah.
It has a hippie vibe.
Everyone was tripping. Yeah. Like everyone was taking psychedelics. Everyone was trying to like expand their mind. It all felt very cool. But then a lot of those early mentors who I mentioned who gave NLP the legitimate stamp of approval, some of them became critical of it in later years because NLP became very commercial. So rather than going the route of we're developing these techniques, let's get peer review, let's go the academic route, and let's have this be integrated into clinical psychology, which was probably, I'm not going to lie, that was probably a path that would have been available to NLP, given who was interested in it in its early years. There was a lot of momentum behind it and a lot of legitimate people who signed on. But the creators of it, Bandler and Grinder, they didn't take it in that direction. They went let's have a bunch of people in the room paying $500 to learn this and basically get rich off of it and give it to salespeople is the direction they went. And so that created a bit of a rift in the development of NLP where, early on it was alt psychology. And then it became something that was a lot more shady, was perceived as a lot more shady over time.
It's such a thorough investigation, and I really hope people listen to the whole thing. And I'm hoping this becomes like the go-to place for people to learn about the history, because you're so right. Just because somebody like Virginia Satir endorses at the beginning doesn't mean she was a fan to the end.
Yep.
And I'd forgotten actually until your series that, I don't know if you know this, Alice, but my mom is a legit family therapist. My dad's a counselor. His third wife, my partner, had a PhD, and all of them reference Satir. Satir was I believe she's one of the godmothers and not the godfather.
For therapy. She's kind of the creator of family therapy. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of the goat of that, for lack of a better word. So to have her endorsement from Nancy that, Satir endorsed NLP in the early years when I was getting involved with NXIVM, to me, it was oh, this is the next evolution of all of these things. And it was very, what's the word you're saying, to be appealing to authority that already existed. So that's how the leverage trust was worked for people like myself.
We understand the concept of appealing to authority.
Yeah. Right? Have you said it in the podcast? Or right?
I don't know how common it is. Well, the idea of appealing to authority is you're in a discussion with something, and I reference a Harvard study to legitimize my point of view in the conversation, but you can't go reference the Harvard study and dispute it. So really what I'm doing is I'm submitting my point of view and backing it up kind of in a way that says I'm right because I have this Harvard study behind me, but you can't refute it because you don't have access to the Harvard study. You can't use your mind to refute it in argument. And what I'm doing is saying, shut up, I'm right.
Yeah.
In a roundabout way.
This happens to me as a journalist all the time, which is why I record my interviews, and then you can go check it later.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can't in real time. You're what are you going to do?
Keith did that a lot, by the way.
Yeah. Well, he did it.
It's in the vow. It's documented in the vow.
And it's kind of a gaslighting, depending on the person. I could be sitting here going, hey, I read this Harvard study. It said this.
Let's talk about it.
And I put legitimacy in it, but you can dispute it all you want. If I'm clear in it. One thing you said about the NLP and that struck me, do you think that they kind of knew if they brought it to peer review, the gig was up with what they were trying to do? And because they could have legitimized themselves even further and charged instead of 500, 1,000 and said Harvard study. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. That's a really fascinating question. There are definitely some members of the NLP community who are still trying to go that route, who are saying, they call it, there's one author in the UK who does have a psychology PhD and is also an NLP researcher, and he calls NLP a proto-science. So not a pseudoscience, which is if you Google it, you're going to find that it's a pseudoscience. But he says it's a proto-science, so it hasn't been researched enough. I think, though, that there are also plenty of people within the NLP community who were never interested in getting that sort of credentialing because it would have hemmed them in, right? Like if you have it be standardized, if you have it be something where you can only do these specific methods and we're going to test only those. Well, what about when you want to apply it to some new malady that like someone walks in the room and is like, cure me now? Like you can't pretend to do that if like you are, suddenly dependent on the stamp of approval from different institutional authorities. So I think it would have been inconvenient for some of the more commercially minded NLP practitioners who did just want to be gurus.
Yeah. And it seems to me there's not enough evidence that NLP has a reproducible process of like, you can come to me with this ailment or this thing. And
that's right.
I can reproduce the result. And a lot of it is dependent on the groundswell and pressure you feel in a training to go, yeah, that worked. And that's hard to measure.
I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, a lot of it is, I think a lot of the things that people do anecdotally say work in NLP, and which we even tried and we're like, whoa, that's so crazy. Like it kind of worked for us during the podcast. A lot of it is placebo effect. And, that's not necessarily like, I think it's interesting because like, when you say that, you're like, okay, so it's BS, it's placebo effect. In fact, no, because the placebo effect is actually an extremely powerful tool that has documented applications across all of these different sectors. And I think the tricky thing about NLP is that it pulls these methods that do have research behind them. So like I can give one example would be like the NLP swish technique. So like this is something where you play back like a difficult memory or any type of memory, but typically like an uncomfortable memory in your mind, like you're watching a movie. Typically you're in a hypnotic, relaxed state. So you are feeling open to suggestion. You play back this memory and then you change things about it. So you like might manipulate the size of the image. So you make it really small and then you make it really big and then you make it really small and you make it really big. You play it backwards. You put a weird music to it. You like change things about it. You change the color, make it bright, make it black and white. This technique is funny to me because it's very similar to something from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is called imagery rescripting, which actually does have research behind it and has been shown to help people feel like they have a bit of distance from like a vivid sensation of agitation or trauma that can be triggered by certain memories. Whereas like, okay, you do all of these rescripting of your own memories and all of a sudden you feel more distance, you feel more control. Like that's real. So NLP takes something like that and they don't reference CBT. They say, no, like we made this up. But then it does kind of have some positive effects on people, but it also becomes part of this larger structure of pseudoscience, which is what NLP is, a pseudoscience.
Okay. So I'm going to comment here.
Yeah.
And tell me if you remember this. So in our trainings, from level 1 to level 2 to whatever, we would have what was called a demo. And a demo would often be the person that Nancy would be working with.
In front of the whole
In front of the whole room. And when we did our quote EMs, we followed a certain script. What does it mean? What does it mean? We drilled down to the meaning. But I can remember, and tell me if you remember this too, is like when Nancy would do a demo, she would go off script and start doing all these types of like,
pulling in all these tools.
Pull this, what is this? We're not amp that up. And what you were just describing is a lot of the stuff that I saw her do. And a lot of what they sold our curriculum on is anyone can do this. But when I would see Nancy work with people, it was clear that she was using other things that she knew and had been practiced in. And I guess you could say it was a quote expert in whatever she thought she was an expert in. But I saw her doing that. I was like, we don't ask those questions.
Nippy, do you smell popcorn?
No.
That was one of the things she used to do. She would do a pattern interrupt in the middle of a thing. I just remembered it when he started talking. And I was like, what's that? And then she's like, that's called a pattern interrupt. Like she would tell us sometimes what she was doing, but like we weren't trained in it.
You just described the bag.
Yeah, she had a
Yeah.
bag. She had a bag of hypnosis, NLP, some
Which
of this.
would always ensure that the demo would work.
Yeah, like her demos were
No,
good.
people would get out of the seat, look like they just had to their brain scrambled. I'm like, oh my God, what was that?
Most of the time.
Most of the
Every
time.
now and then.
Unless you're resistant.
Yeah,
And she'd tell you you're resistant and you were under, it's kind of like Tony Robbins when he gets someone in front of his trainings.
Yeah.
You're not going to tell Tony Robbins he's wrong in front of the room.
That's right. Especially after you paid like $800 to be there.
Yes, and the power dynamic is off. There's so many things
cost
that
fallacy.
feed into power dynamic of people with these tools. I heard it, when
one of them.
Yeah, the swindlers were up there. You're not going to stand up to these people. And that's part of the abuse and part of the con. Anyway, just when you were describing all those things, I was like, that's Nancy's bag you just described.
Did you smell popcorn is crazy.
Yeah.
Because you just are like, wait, I don't smell popcorn, but you just forget what was being discussed.
Yes.
You just lose the thread.
You lose the thread. And speaking of popcorn.
Some people say yes.
Yeah.
They smell it.
Speaking of popcorn, I remember the other tool, and who knows where this comes from, is something where she would have you like describe this event, traumatic event or whatever, and then she'd say, now imagine you're in the movie seat and you're watching it like a movie and you're eating popcorn. And so,
interesting.
So back to the popcorn. I don't know if that's supposed to be related, but that's something that, would help people to distance themselves from something traumatic that happened, but also it's like, that's kind of spiritual bypassing. Like when you mentioned in your series, like, aren't you just repressing or are you dissociating or like, what's happening there? Not a therapist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do think that these, and I think I'm not a therapist either. I would be interested to ask a cognitive behavioral therapist who uses imagery rescripting about, what types of situations it has the best evidence for, because I would assume that it's not for any memory and it's not going to be like the only tool that a clinical psychologist would use.
I have to tell you, Alice, I really enjoyed the series, but I also am glad it dropped weekly because it was very difficult, super triggering, I think more so for me than Nippy. I'll let you speak to it. But like a day would go by and I'd be like, I'm a fucking bitch. I'm in a rage. Why am I in such a mood? Is it my hormones? And then I was like, oh, because I had to listen to Nancy this morning. And this is nothing against you. This is our own relationship to what happened and never having closure and like having to hear her basically, either she's delusional or she's lying. I don't know. But like to hear her say that the sex cult stuff was separate from NXIVM, I just want you to know it in case anyone else asks you. In some ways, she's right. Like there were two separate things. There were people who came and took trainings and they were fine. That's true. And then there's like, the sex stuff that was happening behind closed doors. What she's not being honest about is that NXIVM itself, like there was no, like, how do I say this?
No, what she's not being honest about is she curated both.
Yeah. She EM'd the women about feeling jealous that they had to share Keith. So it's like she didn't know about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if she would acknowledge that. I didn't ask her specifically, but she denies knowledge about what was going on in DOS. And she says that's a bridge further than what she knew and that the self-help techniques that she was doing were separate from what was going on with the blackmail. I think she emphasizes the blackmail and the fact that there was not, that women who were convinced to get a brand, it was, yes, there were psychological techniques, but it was also like they were threatened, right? So that is a threat NLP? No. It's a threat.
Both.
Yeah, you think it's both. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's muddy. It's muddy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's parts of it are muddy, but parts of it are very clear. And what's very clear
aren't for me.
Yeah, part of it that's very clear for me is that, I mean, I actually do believe her that she didn't know about DOS until she knew, but she knew sooner than when she let on. Like people tried to tell her, I tried to tell her, left her a voicemail.
But the symptoms of DOS and the crossover of the behaviors of DOS, like DOS,
that's been going on for years.
DOS was the overt, explicit exchange that had been going on tacitly beforehand. Does that make sense? Like Keith brought the agreement out into the real world where it was like, I'm going to brand you and I'm going to abuse you. And you're
going to sign up for it.
It was a symptom of the emotional abuse that had been going on the whole time. And the contracts that had been signed weren't explicit because they could be broken, because people could just leave. Now, and you nailed this, the blackmail and the collateral were the force, right? Because you said people aren't going to do anything unless there's force. And like force is the leverage to all these things. I mean, our culture and society is predicated on who's the biggest force, right? You don't have human rights without force, really, because if someone's going to come violate your human rights, you appeal to the person who's got the biggest guns and who's going to protect you, right? So that's kind of what Keith was implementing himself was, and Nancy was the benign curator in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And the face of it. So I don't think she necessarily knew about the explicit force, but I don't know what she would have done. Well, we saw what she'd done when she found out. There's a moment where everyone knew. So everyone's character is revealed in that moment to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how you respond to that is a lot of ways your character. You can respond to it slowly to make sure you're seeing it and not overreacting, or you can, and I saw it and she didn't respond. She wanted to protect her company more than she wanted to hold the perpetrator accountable. And that's undeniable to me. So that's
our little rant.
That's not a rant.
Yeah.
That's just my
We just want you to know
interpretation of the forensics of it. That's the reality of it. And that's kind of where the chips have fallen too. Before we hear from our sponsors, just a quick reminder. Our book, A Little Bit Culty, Navigating Cults, Control, and Coercion, is officially out and available on Amazon.
Signed pre-orders have closed, but you can still get your copy today. This book is the culmination of 5 years of conversations, interviews, and research. Everything we've learned about how people get pulled into high-control groups and how to avoid, escape, or heal from them.
If you've been listening to the podcast and want a deeper go-to resource, this is it.
Available now on Amazon in print and as an ebook for Kindle. And yes, the audiobook is coming soon, narrated by us.
Just search A Little Bit Culty and grab your copy. Do it.
Thanks, everybody. Financial stress hits way deeper than just our wallets. Nearly 88% of Americans felt it hard at the start of 2026, sparking anxiety, sleepless nights, depression, even major couple fights. Struggling with money doesn't make you a failure. It just means life is messy, and sometimes you need the right support to carry the emotional load. I personally have been through lots of ups and downs with financial stress, even before our situation and definitely afterwards. And I really encourage you to take the time to talk to somebody about that, because I think that everybody has some kind of, I don't want to say issue, but like things around money, how to make more of it, stress if you don't have it, feeling bad if you do have it, spending it when you do have it, and, fluctuating between scarcity and not saving it, and all the different beliefs that we have around money. You need to talk about those things. It can be overwhelming dealing with it, and it's important to get to the root of those issues. Therapy in regards to money isn't necessarily about balancing your budget. It's for unpacking the shame, the stress, and the anxiety that money triggers, building better coping tools, and feeling less alone. BetterHelp's fully licensed U.S. therapists follow a strict code of conduct, and their matching is seamless. A quick questionnaire pairs you with the right fit based on over 12 years of expertise. Not vibing? You just switch anytime from their tailored options. As the world's largest platform with 30,000 therapists serving 6 million people, BetterHelp boasts a 4.9 rating from 1.7 million reviews. Get the tools to handle financial stress starting today. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/culty. That's betterhelp.com/culty.
If I signed up for Mint Mobile right now, I'd be dodging those wild wireless bills, the sneaky fees, and those so-called free perks that somehow cost you more in the long run. At some point, you have to ask, why are we still doing this to ourselves? Mint Mobile exists to fix exactly that. No drama, no nonsense, just premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. You still get high-speed data and unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network, just without the financial betrayal. And the switch is weirdly easy. Bring your phone, keep your number, activate with eSIM in minutes, and boom, you're saving money. No long-term contracts, no hoops to jump through. So yeah, maybe it's time to break up with your overpriced wireless situation. Next time my contract's up, this is exactly what I'm using. Get 3 months of premium service for $15 a month with Mint Mobile and keep a little more cash in your pocket where it belongs. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/culty. That's mintmobile.com/culty. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, 5 gigabyte plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. I've been cleaning out my closet lately, and by cleaning out my closet lately, I've been asking myself, will I ever wear this again? And to me, that's personal growth. So now I'm focusing on quality over quantity. Pieces that are well-made, versatile, and actually easy to throw on without a full outfit crisis. That's why I keep coming back to Quince. The fabrics feel elevated, the fits are thoughtful, And the pricing doesn't make me spiral. They've got beautiful staples made from 100% European linen, organic cotton, and really soft denim, with styles starting at around $50. Their spring pieces are lightweight, breathable, and effortlessly put together. And it's not just clothing. Their accessories are great too. Their leather bags are made from 100% hand-woven Italian leather and generally look way more expensive than they are. Quince works directly with ethical factories and cuts out the middleman, so you're getting high-quality pieces without the brand markup, which means fewer regrets and way better outfits. Personally, I like the ultra-stretch 24/7 Smart Chinos Athletic Tapered. I got my coffee bean brown pants in blue, and I'm waiting for the khaki as we speak. I wore them in Europe, and the Europeans couldn't get their eyes off me. Right, Sarah? Right, Nippy? Refresh your spring wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/culty for free shipping and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada, too. Go to quince.com/culty for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culty.
What was it like to meet her?
I mean, honestly, I was a little nervous to meet her. I had watched The Vow and I had, read the different articles that had come out. And I knew that she had, been to prison for her complicity within this. And I was like a little nervous. At the same time, I had 2 producers with me. So it was something that I was like, okay, like I don't objectively need to be nervous, but I am regardless. And I mean, it was strange. I mean, she lives in a townhouse that's north of Albany. It's like on one of these cul-de-sacs that is, I guess, like where you guys spend a lot of time. And it feels like a little haunted up there.
Oh, she's in Knox Woods? I guess you probably don't want to say where she is. Yeah.
I don't know exactly. And I'm not familiar with the area, so I can't even say, but I think we said she lives in a suburb north of Albany. That's where NXIVM really, that was where it was developed. That was where all of these crazy things happened. So it was like, oh my gosh, like going into the lion's den. But then when I got there, it was like, I felt totally different because she was like, I mean, she's very she's small, she's unassuming, she's dressed like a soccer mom. She had made us food. She was extremely sweet to us and very gracious. Although I know that you guys are saying you don't believe that you don't believe she was being honest with me, but she didn't dodge any questions. Like I asked her a lot of tough questions where I was like, I don't know if she's even going to be willing to talk about this. And she was willing to talk about everything, like to the best of her ability. It seemed like she didn't shut down any topics, which I was like, wow. And I think she really is very keen to communicate her side of the story, which she feels like got drowned out in the coverage of NXIVM, which is, she really wants to focus on the positive that she feels like some people were helped as part of this group, which is maybe not the thing that should be focused on, but also I think you guys maybe don't even disagree with, right? No. There's right? You said something similar when I interviewed you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, it's been really important for me for people to understand the good of it, not to negate the bad, but to understand what drew us in, what kept us there, to understand that there was good. Yes, people were helped. I just think that there's a lot of people like ourselves and ex-members who are disappointed in her as leader to not also acknowledge the bad, which is disappointing, especially because there was classes that she taught on leadership. If a failure happens in our company, is what she would teach us, is it falls on the leader. Always. Something happens in Mexico, Keith would say, that's on me. I'm the leader. That's my, my company. And then this happens.
And we end up taking more responsibility.
Yeah, I think where we do overlap is that there was good and, people were helped, but I don't think she fully sees yet, that there's a lot of key principles in NXIVM, even just personal responsibility. And this is the same thing with Twin Flames, same thing with One Taste, same thing with
Tony Robbins even. It's all about personal responsibility.
Something happens in your life, you're not the victim. How did you cause it? What would you do differently next time? That's great. That can be a really potent reframe, right? But that same tenet can be used to abuse people. And
absolutely,
right? And that's I think where her, especially Keith, have been highly disappointing for many of us. So I want people to know that did happen. Not everybody came.
For majority of the people.
Yeah, 95%. I don't know. I don't have the percentage, but the same tenets that people had embraced, if they fully embraced it and went further like ourselves, were just ripe for being coerced. So that's the part that I don't think she's really embraced.
I do think it's really interesting how, like, yeah, we were talking before about the soft manipulation techniques, which are also about like self-help and are like kind of like they can be used for positive. But then when they're paired with force and with people who have the direct intent to abuse, that's when they can become really dangerous, right? It's like when they come together, those types of techniques. Yeah.
Yes. Another one with personal responsibility, like options. I had forgotten about that. And you talked about it in your series where people say, you know, how empowering it is to have a interaction with something and then go through a process like NLP or whatever and go, oh, I have all these options. I don't have to react this way. I could feel this way about it, or I could feel that way. And that's really great. Like that opens up, and next thing we call that self-esteem. The more options you have, the higher your self-esteem. That is also ripe for abuse. If I'm saying, hey, I don't like it the way you treat me this way, the abuser could say, well, you don't have to feel that way. You could feel grateful that I'm your master teacher to bring this confusion to light, which was, by the way, a line in NXIVM. If you had somebody who you were struggling with, by the end of the process, you would say, I'm so grateful for this master teacher to bring this to light. Basically, you're thanking your abuser by the end.
That wasn't always.
Well, that could be. It wasn't always that way, but it could be.
Yeah.
And anyway,
I think more to the point is like if you have this, like I don't think Nancy got involved with this to hurt people, obviously.
No, I think she really did want to help people.
And I think she saw an opportunity. And I think when there were some discrepancies about what went on with Keith and his message, she didn't do the about face and pivot in the way that I feel like was appropriate and put an end to it. And she's going to go on her rehabilitation tour and all that stuff. But really, that's the moment of like your personhood in a lot of ways. And like what you really want to stand for is, can you do that? And look, it's not easy. It's, you know, she probably would have had to destroy a lot of things in the process to like her company, which she calls it. And I got from the episode is like, she doesn't feel worthy unless she's helping people. And I don't think she was willing to compromise that aspect of her life to not help people in relationship to what Keith was doing. I think she felt like her pursuit of helping people was more important, and she was not going to compromise that in spite of other people being hurt around her. And that's kind of her axe to grind, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think like clearly she has a very complex relationship and like memories of Keith, because she's like in the interview that we did with her in that episode 8 of our podcast Mind Games, like she's saying that, you know, Keith helped her, that there was like genuine, you know, that, you know, she really looked up to him and she had this kind of like, she really put him on a pedestal. But then also she's saying that like he kind of abused her, right? So it's an interesting thing. Like through interviewing her, I feel like she would kind of go back and forth sometimes about what impact Keith had on her life, even though she was overall seemed pretty negative about him. I mean, there were a lot of books about psychopathy on her bookshelf, and I asked her about it. I don't think this made it into the podcast, but I was like, are you reading about this? And she was like, yeah, I've been reading all about psychopaths, and basically saying that she thought Keith was someone who didn't have empathy.
So she does recognize that.
So she is
that's
on
good.
that journey. So that's actually...
She's on that journey.
So that's reassuring to see that's where she's directed herself, because that to me tells me that's a journey of accountability and some like reconciling how it happened to her. And I think that's where her wisdom can lie in the future. You know, there's a story I want to tell. And
yeah.
My relationship with the organization, I left. You could say I had 2 stints. One was I took the training, had a good experience, didn't want to be a coach, was like, great, that's good stuff. Left the organization. And there was a story she told before I left. And she was talking about...
What year was this now?
This is probably 2003. And then I came back in 2006 to go shoot the film. And she was talking about how Keith was working with people. And she said something like, he knew I wanted his attention and he ignored me for a week. Didn't say a word. I was in a room, didn't even look at me. She's like, that is someone who's committed to your growth. And I remember thinking, what a fucking dick. I go,
yeah.
that's not how I would do it. I would go, hey, listen, here's where you need to pivot. And that to me felt abusive. But I wasn't like there to I was like, I'm not sure I would have done that for a week. I think that's something that could happen in about a 15, 20-minute conversation about but he was giving me an inductive experience of what it was like to not have my needs met, blah, blah, blah. But aren't you guys trying to build something together? Like that felt off, but I was also, well, maybe he is. Do you know what I mean?
We would assume the best out of him.
Yeah, I wasn't like, but I remember thinking, that's kind of a dick move. Like, that's a week of work you guys could have been doing. Like, but like,
did she tell you about that?
Inductive experience of like, Well, she had a lot of anecdotes. So that was just one I remember.
She didn't tell me about that, but I think I can totally see it. And I bet she remembers it. I mean, I think like what I thought a lot about was like how do I say this? I mean, Nancy's clearly someone who's very perceptive and intelligent, right? Like when I met her and we did like a mini NLP session so we could demo some of these techniques, which, people have been like, why did you do that? Well, because these techniques can be very abstract and difficult to understand. And I felt like as a reporter, the only way to really understand them was to try them. Again, I had my producers there. It was in the context of an interview. So I did feel like it was a safe thing to do. But yeah, I think, so she was very perceptive. Like, and I noticed that, even just small things I said, words I used, she would ask questions about them where I was like, wow, she doesn't know me very well, but she's really thinking about this. It's just interesting how she could miss Keith, right? Like how she could miss Keith being so clearly abusive to her, like in this anecdote that you just described, Nippy. Like this is an anecdote where he's clearly perceiving the part of her that wants validation and approval from an authority figure, the part of her that's a good student, a hard worker, a professionally aspiring, like type A personality. And he's using that against her. And anyway, it's just sad to me. It's sad to me, like how people can be like exploited like that.
I think this is in the vow, maybe not, but one of her stories and why it's also been a little hard to hear her, not just your podcast, but like Casey had her on her podcast and, she tells these stories of the origins of NXIVM and we've heard those stories 1,000 times. Like anytime she came to present in Vancouver or in front of a new audience, she'd tell her origin story of how she met Keith and we've heard it all these millions of times. But she was also a bit of a ham on stage and she would say, and then when Keith was presenting like how they would do NXIVM together, he said that if you're going to work with me, that this is a lifetime commitment. And then she would make a joke because she's divorced. She's like, well, I've done that before. And it was a sort of like hammy thing. But I think, and to your point about it being sad, in many ways, she was like the first, not DOS because she wasn't in DOS, but like he had asked her to make a lifetime vow of commitment to her. And she, I think at a certain point, because she burnt all her bridges, and this is actually, something that we talk in a chapter called about burnt bridges, is that when you're in a cult and you cut ties off to the outside world, the more you do it, the more you become connected and committed to the group. And it is sad because I do genuinely believe that she wanted to help people.
She was before she met Keith.
And she was. And so she has to make her work good. She has to make it count because she made this commitment. And, I lost my point of the story, but I think you get it.
It was a story.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that you're saying, like, it's so obvious, but I hadn't thought of it before. And I think that's maybe what you were saying earlier, Nippy, which is that, the vow that people took in DOS, like the idea of like collateral and these contractual obligations to be like a quote slave. You're saying that was already workshopped in less official versions. And maybe you're saying that, Nancy's requirement to like commit to Keith for life was a version of that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%.
Hundo P.
I don't know if I've told you this, that once we got out and we had done our initial, like the New York Times had come out, we were contacted by other people who'd left in the past, quietly slipped away. And there's one woman who'd left to pursue like a doctorate or something like that. And she was there when we first joined. I think she'd left a year or two. So this would have been like 2005, 2006. And then she was gone. And we reconnected and she said, when you described DOS, that was my life with Keith in his harem in 2005, 2006. We left in 2017. So he'd been doing that for a long time. But when I say life was DOS, it was nude photos that he had. Like he wasn't saying, give me your collateral, but he had them and she knew that and the women knew that. Being on call, you couldn't have your phone off, you had to be available to him. Weight restrictions and monitoring.
Calorie
restriction. Yeah, all of that stuff was at play. There wasn't a master slave, pyramid scheme structure yet, but all of the lifestyle, and that's partly why she left. She didn't want to live like that, and she did, and good for her. But it made me realize, like, DOS was a formalized version of what he'd been doing for years. So that's where I feel like,
She hasn't reconciled
She hasn't
that.
reconciled. That's been going on from the beginning.
Yeah.
All of that's been going on from the beginning, behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, it's also like, he built in these like checks for that by forcing women to like say, I want to do this, and like, this is my choice, right? Like that was like part of like, that was like this sort of performance of false consent was part of that formalization as well, but even maybe predated that.
And
Yeah.
Nancy enforced it, in a lot of ways we'll never know the ins and outs. And I'm sure she's going to have to deal with other people who know exactly what she did at some point.
Yeah, I think she'd probably deny that.
Yeah, I don't think Sarah and I are a problem to blowing her cover. I think there's plenty of other people out there who I know I've spoken to who, if she has to reconcile with one day, it'll be her karma.
Now for something a little less culty, a quick sponsor message. Okay, people, if you know me by now, you know that I don't gatekeep. I share all the good news. And thanks to our sponsor, Wayfair, I'm going to tell you about something very exciting. It's called Way Day. It's basically the Super Bowl of home shopping, and it's happening April 25th to 27th. We're talking up to 80% off with free shipping on everything. Yes, everything. And if you're like me, you also have a list of everything you want to change in your home or fix. Maybe you've been side-eyeing your living room or thinking that your patio deserves a glow-up. This is the moment. Wayfair makes it ridiculously easy to find exactly what fits your style and budget. Furniture, decor, outdoor stuff, it's all on sale. I'm personally eyeing a little piece to go by the front door with a shelf for the shoes at the bottom. Why there's so many shoes in the house all the time. And drawers on the top for all the life stuff, keys, earbuds, lip gloss. Because it's time to get organized here at the Edmondson Ames household, and Wayfair is our personal one-stop shop to make that happen. We also love how easy it is to shop, the filters, the reviews, the photos. It's like having thousands of people help you avoid a bad decision. Plus, Wayfair Verified is basically your shortcut to the good stuff. They vet products with a full quality checklist so you know what you're getting, and we can always trust the quality. And if you're not exactly assembly inclined like Nivea and I, they've also got installation options too, which have honestly saved us from at least one marriage-ending furniture situation. Fast, free shipping, huge deals, no guesswork. Way Day is the sale to shop the best deals in-home. We're talking up to 80% off with fast and free shipping on everything. Head to wayfair.com April 25th through 27th to shop Way Day. That's WAYFAIR.com, Wayfair. Every style, every home. Happy shopping. Sponsor break's done. Back for more culty stories.
I have a question in terms of, she tells a story about how Keith pursued her for years and all that stuff. And, I wrote a pretty scathing letter to her at the end of this whole thing. And it was something to the effect, I said, and I was like, I think Keith chose you because he knew that you'd be someone he can manipulate that. Did you get, and there's a pattern of her doing this. Did you get that impression that and did she think she understood that she was, Keith's a predator, right? He's a criminal predator.
Did she see the pattern?
Do you think she recognized that she was preyed upon and used in a way? Do you think
she does recognize that now?
Okay.
I think she does recognize that she was used. She even used that specific word that Keith used her. She didn't ever saw it coming, but he misused her. He used her methods and he used her. Yeah, she sees herself as a victim.
Well, she is. Technically. That's a crime. Well,
yeah.
So, I said
she is a victim. Yeah.
I said this on a podcast probably about a month ago, and it was probably like 2 or 3 years in after to really go, oh my God, Sarah and I were a victim of a crime.
Yeah.
I felt like, we got conned. It was a crime. And I think Nancy was a victim of a crime.
And a perpetrator.
Yeah.
And then ended up being a perpetrator. So I think her story is better told from that perspective. And I don't know if she's leaned into that at all, or then maybe that can allow her to have some credibility in a career.
I think that your series does show that. But I wonder if she was able to see the pattern of being conned a few times. It seemed like with her NLP situation, she missed red flags and followed somebody who was less than ethical. Do you think she or do you feel that way, or?
Yeah, I think she does. She even said to me, I'm very gullible. When I told her that Richard Bandler, the co-founder of NLP, does not have a PhD in mathematics, which is a rumor that either he or some of people that worked for him started. And there were many rumors like this. It's very difficult to verify this guy's backstory. There's so much lore, so much myth. But Nancy was shocked. She was like, oh my God, I always thought this guy really did have a PhD. And she couldn't believe it when I told him. didn't. And I think her reaction's genuine. So yeah, I do think she's making the connection to a degree. So yes, I think she does see herself as a victim. And I think coming on the podcast, what she wanted to talk about that and reframe her story.
We didn't talk too much about the founders of NLP. And I think that, there's a lot to unpack.
There's
in
so
your,
much.
What the fuck with that guy?
I know. What was the most?
The murder.
The murder trial.
The murder trial.
What the fuck?
Summarize that in the best way you can. And also I want to know if Nancy knew about that, because we never certainly knew about that.
Oh my God. Yes. Great question. So, okay, for listeners who haven't listened to our podcast yet, the co-founder of NLP, this guy, Richard Bandler, who created it as an undergraduate student and experimented on, his peers, and then went on to become like a traveling guru, selling this to companies and salesmen. This man was tried for murder in the late 1980s. He was acquitted, but the circumstances of the trial and everything that came out in the testimonies cast a unflattering light on the NLP community, and perhaps as part of its pivot from a more sort of legitimate psychotherapist endorsed modality to something that got adopted by NXIVM and pickup artists. I'm speculating there, but the timing does match up.
Fruits of my labor.
This guy, so, according to a jury, he did not kill this woman. I just want to be very clear. But the circumstances were wild. It was him, his friend, and this woman who was the friend's ex-girlfriend, all in a room together on an epic coke binge at in the early hours of the morning, which was not atypical for this group. And one of the men shot her, and they both accused each other. And no one was ever convicted of her murder. So it's a murder that remains unsolved. So what did Nancy know about this? Was your question? She did. I asked her. Well, I have at first assumed that maybe she joined up before this murder trial. She was already a practicing hypnotherapist, and NLP may have been on her radar before this sort of sordid escapade and this sort of sordid moment in the history of NLP. But no, she joined up after. And, I think it didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't raise a red flag for her. She was like, yeah, people said, oh yeah, 2 men in a room and one of them killed her. And, oh yeah, he stood trial for murder, but, no one talked about it that much. So yeah, she was aware.
Yeah. God, it's just such a great lesson in doing your research before you join anything.
Yeah, it's strange to me, but I have to say, she wasn't the only one. We were looking into this, Richard Bandler during the murder trial before the acquittal, I mean, the trial lasted almost a year or even a bit more, around a year. He was running NLP seminars that were full to pay for legal expenses as well as other expenses. So this is people were flocking to NLP as it was getting coverage as this associated with this really sordid murder and sort of a criminal underworld of Northern California at that time. So it's really odd. The other guy, his friend, who also, he says that this friend of his murdered this woman. I mean, that guy was an NLP trainer too. And part of why he was ultimately discredited as a witness and that Bandler was acquitted is because he made crazy claims about NLP during his testimony. He said he could use it to control streetlights, with his mind. He was like, I'm so good at NLP, I can telepathically turn lights on and off. That's NLP. And of course, the jury was like, this guy's insane. So we can't trust him. And he's the primary witness of this murder. So it was really wild.
Bonkers journey you went on, truly. And I commend you for your committedness to figure it all out and give us a resource, because, I mean, who has the time? You have the time, but now we have the resource. So thank you.
Yes. And I think one takeaway for our podcast is, if you want to know if NLP has been used on you, if you want to learn more about the techniques so that you can avoid them and guard yourself against them, we explain it in this podcast, and you can see if you have any sort of associations, any memories. If you think this has been used on you, this is a great way to confirm it. And also just, learn more about this wild history, which has, positive and negative sides. I think the podcast is the only resource that exists in this comprehensive way. And, from a journalistic perspective, we don't have an axe to grind with NLP, but we're not insiders. We're not selling anything. Mm-hmm. So we have a more neutral approach.
It's really valuable.
I'd also say the interview with Bandler
is pretty telling.
Well, it's a great litmus test.
Yeah.
It's a great litmus test.
Yeah, we interview Bandler. Yeah.
And
you handled that well, Alice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to share that story?
Yes. Yeah, you want me to share that story. So, okay.
But people also should listen to the podcast.
For sure, listen.
People should listen to the podcast. Yes.
I just wanted to reframe it in a light of you found the founders of the, if you want to call it curriculum, and how did they pass their own purity test, I guess.
Yeah, great. Oh, I see what you're getting at. We reached out to both of the founders of NLP, Richard Bandler and John Grinder, while reporting this podcast. Both of them are still alive, and Bandler is still teaching seminars. So I attended one of his seminars actually in London. That was a wild experience. But, for, I would say, over a year, we were not getting anywhere on the interview request. We were just getting like the runaround, never managed to talk to him even face to face. And then eventually he did agree to sit down for an interview. John Grinder declined an interview, but Richard Bandler, who is the main, person who we were focused on, he's a really interesting life story. He did agree. And I think it was a fascinating interview. I mean, I asked him, for example, about NLP and, the common allegation online that it is a pseudoscience. And he didn't really deny it. I mean, he said he never wanted to make it a science, that he considers NLP an art, and that it's, to try to hold it to peer review scientific standards was never his intention. So I actually thought he had some really interesting responses to common criticisms of NLP that were honestly kind of compelling. Like I can see where he's coming from. But our interview did get a bit derailed towards the end because I asked about domestic violence allegations that were made by his ex-wife and other women. There's, various core documents that speak to him threatening employees, holding guns to one employee's head. He was a very volatile guy. And the funny thing is, he taught emotional control, right? Like that's his whole is, use NLP to control your emotional state. And NXIVM took that, right? Like that was a big part of the curriculum that got borrowed was here's how to control your emotional reactions to things. So I didn't know what interviewing him would be like. But when I asked him about some of these controversies, he flipped out on me and he hung up. He had an emotional outburst and hung up the call. So
he needs an EM. I bet Nancy could give him an EM.
I just thought it was just, I couldn't believe it when I heard it. And then I was like, of course. Yeah.
But he doesn't interact with a lot of journalists. And I wasn't trying to be extremely provocative. I was just asking
these questions
that we're required to ask. If somebody makes these allegations or if we read about them in court documents, we are required, and it's important to give someone a chance to respond to them. So it's, part of due diligence that we would do for any source. But he really did not react to it well. He flipped out. So.
Well, I think your point to him that you said, or that when you were talking about in the podcast, that he, didn't have the capacity to calmly respond to you is probably because he is surrounded by yes people. He doesn't do a lot of press and no one's questioning him. And now you're dredging up something from the past and he's was not going to have it. And it did remind me of how, with our experience, I didn't have that much personal interaction with Keith, but with Nancy, she could flip on a dime. And, I had a bit of a cringe, also soft spot in my heart when she packed you lunch for the train because that's something that I would do. That's something that if you came to my house and you're leaving and I would be like, oh, take some snacks. That's just, and partly it's the sort of Jewish mother in us, the overfeeding people, that's a trait.
Yeah.
And not to say that I am perfect and I get angry and everything, but for somebody like Nancy who's supposed to be a leader and be teaching emotional stability and choice and not being reactive, she could get very angry and just lay into people worse than what you showed in the podcast.
Oh yeah, I never saw that side of her, and
of
perhaps
course
she would deny that allegation.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's an allegation.
From what I saw, she was the emotional control, state control aspect of NLP. She had down pat, and she explained it in a way that made it finally click for me. And honestly, I think it's a pretty interesting technique.
No, when I first met her, I think this is in my book too, I was like, this is my relative, this is my family. I've not only do I even sorry, mom, you're my mom. I love you. My number. At the time I was like, she's my bonus mom. We are from the same shtetl in Russia for sure. We are connected at a DNA level. That's how good her rapport was.
Interesting.
Everybody else is out of my psyche, but she still lives in my head in some ways. So that's for me and my healing journey, which I always think, oh, I'm all clear. And then I listened to the podcast and I was like, her voice is just hard. It's just unresolved stuff. And that's yeah.
I mean, there's no such thing as being like deprogrammed fully, right? It's like probably like a constant process of reckoning with the indoctrination of that type, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's different for everybody. Like Nippy's commitment to our company, it was different for me than for him. And
I didn't have I think the way you talk about it and the way I talk about it, our differences are pretty clear. You had an emotional relationship with Nancy. I didn't. Mine was professional.
Yeah, she was my bonus
player
mom.
Coach. I treated the organization like that a lot, more transactional, and I felt like we were doing good work. I didn't have those emotional bonds with Nancy in the same way. But you guys are both caretakers, so that's like kind of what you guys share. And Nancy you guys are both provided with a platform to do what I think you guys do extremely well. It was just under an unfortunate premise of abuse. And so you've owned that.
You did talk to Tony Robbins.
Yeah, my co-host Zoe Lascaz interviewed Tony Robbins.
In person?
No, over Zoom. So yeah, they had a long interview, and it's interesting because at certain points in his history, he has seemed to play down his origins in NLP, but whatever, today he was very open and transparent talking about how he got his start as an NLP trainer. I mean, he's definitely the most famous NLP person
for
ever.
sure.
Yeah. And kind of, I think, surpassed the modality in prominence. But it is interesting because a lot of his techniques you can really trace back to some of the NLP stuff. So
I had such a strong memory of being early days in NXIVM and being new to a lot of the stuff. And somebody came in who'd done a lot of Tony Robbins, and they were in a state module, and they're like, this is Tony Robbins. Like, this is straight up NLP. And I was like, I don't know. I guess so. But our whole thing was like tribute where tribute was due. And Keith had created everything. So It was very, I got very defensive. Like, no, this is new. Like, this is proprietary. It's patent pending and you can't speak of it. Wrong. So
you talked like that too.
I did. That was my Sarah Edmondson and NXIVM voice. For our listeners, many of whom are recovering from high control groups, what do you think are some of the red flags that someone might be using influence or persuasion techniques in a manipulative way?
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's flags that someone is using a persuasion technique. Whether they're using them in a manipulative way is something that I think the listeners have to discern for themselves based on the power dynamic between them and their interlocutor, and whether that person has an incentive, financial incentive or other incentive to exploit them. I think that the context is really important in terms of use versus misuse. But the techniques are the same regardless. And the techniques that I would watch out for are the mirroring and the pacing. So matching your breathing, someone matching their breathing towards your breathing, someone having a sort of almost uncanny level of control over the tonality in their voice and modulating that to mirror your own tonality. The other thing is deliberately ambiguous language. So this is a technique from hypnosis where a person will speak in a sort of confusing way. Pattern interrupt we talked about before is one example of this, but it could also just be non sequiturs or something that makes you feel like you're kind of dozing off. You're like, why can't I pay attention to this? Or why is my mind going blank when this person's talking? That's not always an accident. In fact, that can be very deliberate. And the reason that it is done is because it causes your conscious mind to take a backseat, and your sort of imaginative fantasy version of I wonder, I start thinking of a vacation I want to go on, or a beautiful house that I can imagine living in someday. And you are in this fantasy world where you're filling in the blanks between the sort of logical holes in what someone is saying. That is from hypnosis. That is a hypnotic technique, and it's not an accident. So watch out for that for sure.
Mm-hmm. And that's also, I think, part of the game too, right? Where they talk about future faking, where they're dangling the person's dreams and getting them to go into the future.
That's exactly right.
By the way, Alice, totally gamed by a guy, did all the things from the game. He negged me, he future faked, this is before Nippy, but I
hope so.
Yeah, it was a very it was somebody that I just didn't find attractive at all, and just led into my life because he wasn't a threat. And then he wormed his way in, and then after I learned about the game, I was like, oh, he did all of those things on me, every single one.
Did it work?
For a little bit, yeah, until I caught on. But I also realized that Keith negged. He didn't call it negging, but Keith was definitely.
Well, that was ignoring Nancy for a week.
Yeah, ignoring
Exactly.
Nancy for a week.
I was thinking of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was, I'm not sure if he read the game. He probably did. He had a huge library of things like that. And he was not original. He just plagiarized everywhere.
That's really mean.
Yeah. He was mean.
Yeah.
He was mean.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, no, these are the same. This is NLP is the source material for all of these things. Yeah.
I have to say that since you interviewed me, now that I've listened to all 9 episodes, I am going to change my stance on how I feel about some of these tools. And I don't know if I'm going to continue using them until I get to, if I can really be clear on like, that there's, I don't know.
Well, good question to have. I think oftentimes,
I'm going to revisit.
I think oftentimes it's who's using them.
Well, that's, the tool, right?
I think that's true. And I know it's kind of a cliche, like the knife in the hand of a murderer versus like a knife in the hand of a surgeon. I know that it's a cliche, but I don't think it's wrong. Like, I think that there's actually some truth to that. I do too. Often parroted by sketchy people.
Yes. Just because I heard it first from Keith Raniere doesn't mean it's not true.
I think of Tony Robbins. I just don't think there's anyone that's going to stand up to his authority. So there's a combination of his tools and his earned authority that just goes unquestioned now, because I've seen some viral stuff that goes around
about him,
Tony Robbins, and it's like strong thought control stuff. He'll say, "Is that your mom or your dad?" And the person will start answering it's mom or dad, but he only gave him 2 options. It could have been anything. It could have been like, and I just kind of felt like, well, he's leading and this person's not going to go, "Hey, neither," in front of a crowd of paying. Do you know what I mean? So just the dynamic of the pretense under which he's using those, I have more questions. I'm not saying he's even doing anything bad. He might actually help the person, but I just think that dynamic, it makes the tools less precise because he's only giving 2 options. So right off the bat, you can kind of see like the discrepancies. Anyway.
I feel like we covered a lot of ground and your series is amazing and we hope everybody listens to it and, more questions, more conversations to have from it. We'll keep talking about it. And
thanks for doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
That was great.
Yeah, I really appreciate your work.
The episodes were great. I learned a lot. And
commitment to journalistic integrity to get to the root of these things. So thanks, Alice.
You so much.
Let you get back to your day.
Yeah. Okay, I really appreciate seeing you guys again.
Likewise.
Have a good one.
You too.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye. All right, everybody, that was the end of our episode with Alice Hines. Please let us know what you thought on Instagram or Patreon if you are with us there. There is a section about NLP in our book. Again, plug for the book. Buy the book. Buy the book. You are on a beach reading a little bit culty.
What if buying the book
helps
buying
you
the
in
your
book
life?
Will be the answer to your success?
Imagine this.
Imagine buying a book. Okay. We love you guys. Let us know what you think. Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We hope you're enjoying A Little Bit Culty. If so, please do show us some love. Drop a rating or leave a review. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Even better, send this episode to someone who needs it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're just a little bit susceptible. Or maybe they just love a good story. Spread the word, spread the love. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production.
Executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy.
Our production coordinator is Leslie Dinsmore.
Writing by Sandra Namoto and social media marketing by Eric Swarzinski and Brooke Keene.
Our theme song Cultivated is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.